All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Bruce Belzowski. I'm the Managing Director of the Automotive Futures Group here in Ann Arbor, Michigan. I'd like to welcome you to our 14th annual Inside China Automotive Conference, something we started in 2008. This is as I said, our 14th conference. We have been looking at all different aspects of the Chinese automotive industry since then. And we'll be talking about many of those today, and then some of the things that have been developing since then and that are new for today. We have a great list of speakers today. I'm going to start off by looking at some of the issues related to the automotive industry, and I'm going to start off by giving you a little information about our group. So I said, this is the Inside China, Understanding China's Current and Future Automotive Industry. A little bit about our group, some conference logistics, sales and production information, and some 2021 consumer insight. As I said, I'm the Managing Director. I'm retired from the University of Michigan Transportation Research Institute. We've been running automotive futures outside the university for 3 years now. Our funding comes from our affiliate program, our research projects, and from our conferences. And primarily, though, our funding comes from our affiliate members. And this is where we stop and thank all of them for all the support that they give us. And we're also pleased to announce our new affiliate member, Pacific Northwest Lab, Northwest National Laboratories. And welcome. We have partners, our research partners, our IT organizations, Oems, government NGOs, as well as suppliers, consultants, and manufacturers. Our major research projects are the powertrain strategies for the 21st century that we've been doing since about 2008. Our China New Energy Vehicle project that is now morphed into our global EV project. We'll talk about some of the results from that during the conference today. We'll also talk, our next conference will be on new mobility, looking at IT, technology, policy, and innovative business models that are part of new mobility. We have a strong group of student researchers, as well as Kara Elkire, who's online today. She's monitoring the YouTube video that you're watching right now. And so we have a variety of students across the age groups and classes and different specialties within the university as well. One of the things that we've been working on over the last year is building up our LinkedIn page. We've been focusing on posting information and knowledge that we've gained recently on the LinkedIn page. So we do that 2 to 3 times a week, and we encourage anyone who's watching us today to sign up, to connect with us, and to follow us. Our next conference, as I said, is our New Mobility Conference, New Mobility and the Revolution of Goods Movement, on February 16th. We also have a conference coming up on April 20th, but we're still deciding on what the topic's going to be. All right. Conference logistics. We have 4 presenters today. Hua Wang he's the Associate Dean of Emlan Business School in Lyon, France. Alex Hu from Plant Moran, who's a partner there. Elario Mozako from Center for Strategic and International Studies in DC. And Tom Tao from the University of Delaware. They're going to be giving us some good insights on a variety of topics related to the Chinese automotive industry. Alex is going to be starting us off looking at some issues related to supply chain and the introduction, especially the NEV supply chain. Then we'll do a short 10-minute Q&A with him, and then Hua will start off with talking about his recent book about the Geely Motor Company. He's going to be joined by his colleague Giovanni Balsetta, who also was co-author of the book. Then we'll take a 10-minute break, and I'll come back and talk a little bit more about some of the insights that we've been gleaning from our global EV project. And then Elario Mozako will speak about some of the work she's been doing on NEV policies at the central government and provincial level. And then Tom Tao is going to be talking about some of his recent research on automotive manufacturing and supplier strategies in China. And then hopefully we'll be done around 12:30. For post-conference mailing, all the attendees will get a link to the presentations. We'll hopefully have those out this weekend. Affiliates will receive the presentations, but they'll also receive a document with and a link to the review of the highlights from the conference. The agenda, speaker bios, registration lists, sponsorship opportunities, affiliate information, and upcoming events are all on our Inside China conference website. That's on the underneath the description of the conference on the YouTube live stream. And also I sent that in the email that I sent to you recently. Audience questions and conference feedback, we're also going to have, there's also a link underneath the YouTube video that has a link for you to submit audience questions for the speakers. Kara Alkire will be collecting those and sending those to me. We'll also be later on after the conference sending you some conference feedback emails so we can get some feedback from you. So please do give us some feedback. We need that. We haven't been getting much feedback recently, so it's always good to hear both the good and the bad about what's going on with the conferences. And we also have a Meet the Speakers networking program. This is all of our speakers have agreed to participate in this program where that takes place. We sent you a link to register to meet with any of the speakers. It's also underneath, as I said, the description of the conference underneath the YouTube live stream video. The program will begin about 5 to 10 minutes after the conference adjourns, and our research assistant Jiaxi Chang will be emailing you information for the ones you who sign up to speak with a speaker, and information about joining that Zoom meeting, which will take place separately from this one. So let's look at what's been going on in China recently in terms of sales and production. So when you look at the Chinese auto industry, we see it divided into 3 major groups. There are joint venture manufacturers. There are joint ventures that have their own brands, and they're independent domestic manufacturers. And then there's one subgroup of foreign manufacturers that do not have a joint venture partner, Tesla and Honda. The main joint venture groups in China are the GAC group with Fiat, Honda, and Toyota, the Nissan, the Dongfeng group with Hyundai, Kia, Nissan, and PSA, and I think Chang'an with Ford and Mazda, FAW with Toyota and Volkswagen, BAIC with Mercedes-Benz and Hyundai, Kia, SAIC Motors with GM and Volkswagen, and BMW with Brilliance. And one of the main things that has happened recently in the industry was that the central government has told the joint ventures that they can readjust ownership of the joint venture. And some companies like BMW and Brilliance have changed their relationships from a 50-50 joint venture to 75-25 with BMW in the lead. So most of the other manufacturers have pretty much stayed where they are. And then, so it's finding interesting to see how this may change in the future. The main independent domestic brands are JMC, Photon, BYD, GAC, GV, Chery, and Great Wall. And the new wave of emerging independent Chinese EV manufacturers, NIO, Li Auto, Xpeng, and Weltmeister. One of the things that's been going on in China, to anyone who's been following the industry for a while, is the reduction in sales, which has taken place for the last 3 or 4 years. And as you can see from things peaked around 2017, and then sales have been decreasing in 2018, 2019, 2020, and I think that this will probably happen again in 2021. Okay, and when you look at the what's been happening in 2021, you can see that for much of the year, sales have been the growth rate has been less than what it has in 2020. Things have been gone up in September, but you can see this may lead to another overall lower sales year in China. When you look at the Chinese total vehicle production, the passenger cars have changed slightly in 2020, but as sales have decreased, but the relationship is still heavily focused on light trucks and again passenger cars less so, and heavy duty medium trucks and buses less than that. The top Chinese joint venture group production for 2020, which is last year, shows that the SAIC group is the leader and has been for many years, because it's the combination of both Volkswagen and General Motors, as well as the SAIC own brands, and then the following groups of FAW, Dongfeng, Guangzhou, Chang'an, BAIC, and Brilliance. When you look at the top Chinese brands themselves, now this is Shanghai SAIC is selling its own brand of vehicles, which is what the government was hoping and expecting from the joint ventures, and it hasn't probably turned out as selling as many and producing as many vehicles and designing their own vehicles as much as the government has expected, but it's something that has been growing over time. And so these are the major Chinese brands. When you look at 2015 to 2020, you can see some real changes in what's been going on in the industry. And it really varies, as you can see, by year. For example, Chang'an, which was one of the leaders in sales prior to 2020, had a terrible year in 2020. And Dongfeng also went down from 2019. SAIC was up above compared to all their years. So you can see some real growth in SAIC. FAW was down. Guangzhou was down, and BAIC was also down. This is, of course, reflecting the overall reduction in production and sales in China for 2020. And as I said, something that has been going on since 2018, 2019, and 2020. So any companies that are showing that they can actually be able to show some growth during this period of time is really showing that they're really competitive. When you look at the top foreign brand joint venture production, you look at for 2020, VW had a great year. GM was down slightly from 2019. You look at the Honda, Toyota, Nissan is also down. Hyundai, Kia, Mercedes is up a little bit. BMW up a little bit. Ford is pretty even with 2019, but still in a low numbers of sales overall compared to the VW and General Motors. For the top Chinese manufacturers, Geely, BYD, followed by BYD, Chery, JMC, Great Wall, and Photon. Photon only sells trucks, so that we're not surprised by in terms of their vehicle production. I expect them to be low. But when we look at these same companies over time, we look at some real differences. Almost every company, except maybe, well, BYD is about almost even with 2019. Zhonghuai is almost even with 2019, but all other companies, especially Great Wall, have for 2020 were all low down from what they were in 2019. Again, representing decreases in sales in over the last 3 or 4 years. When we look at the different models, number of models, this is for the independent Chinese companies. You can see that in 2021, some of the, and we're comparing sedans and hatchbacks to SUVs, MPVs, microvans, and pickups. You can see that general growth in the number of models that the companies are coming out with, especially in the SUV platforms. MPVs. This is the area, and we could see that in the general sales, whereas the light trucks really are have been selling more than passenger vehicles. And when we look at the Chinese domestic brands, we're from Chang'an and Dongfeng, BAIC, again, some really increases from 2019 to 2020 in terms of the number of models that they're coming out with, which is going to make them more competitive, but it also makes them spend a lot more money on developing new vehicles. And some of the independent brands also for, now this is all for 2021 only, we'll see some growth in, again, in the SUV, MPVs, microvans, and pickup segments. Significant growth, and it really shows you some of the companies that have so many more vehicles than others, and some of the independent brands as well. So I want to finish up with a few consumer insights that we've been looking at. In particular, we're looking at how the Chinese manufacturers and the joint venture companies, how they're doing in terms of the J.D. Power indices that we use in the U.S. to measure sales satisfaction, initial quality, and long-term dependability of vehicles. So as I said, the J.D. Power has J.D. Power China looking at sales satisfaction and looking at the dealership experience. The initial quality is problems with new vehicle purchases after 90 days of ownership, and the dependability index, where that measures the number of problems in vehicles after 3 years of ownership. When you look at for 2021, you're looking at how mass market brands actually exceeded luxury brands in terms of sales satisfaction. The leaders, these are just some of the examples of companies that are some of the higher level companies. You would call those winners in sales satisfaction, both in the luxury segment where Lincoln is leading, and in the mass market section where GAC, Honda, and Buick rank as high, but also GAC Toyota is very, very little difference between 744, 742, 741 in terms of sales satisfaction. The Chinese domestic brands lag in sales satisfaction. It's something that will continue, that they'll be need to continue to work on. When you look at where are the main areas of that people are looking at for the luxury brands, for the where they're leading in terms of online shopping experience, usage of digital tools, and price negotiation, whereas mass market brands are leading in terms of communication before visit and also test drives. When you look at the initial quality of mass market brands and luxury brands, the Chinese domestic brands continue to improve their quality on average that make them competitive with foreign brands. The initial quality of mass market brands, actually, in this case, the number of problems per 100 vehicles, a lower number is better. And this is a big deal because this, in particular, in the initial quality, first 90 days of ownership, shows that mass market brands are actually doing better than the luxury brands in terms of initial quality. Big issue for those types of companies, the luxury brands in China. When you look at the new vehicle quality for mass market brands surpassing luxury brands, this is something that has been going on over the past 5 years, where mass market brands are actually catching up to luxury brands in terms of initial quality. Also in terms of brand image, Chinese brands have improved in all aspects, especially in their reputation and environmental friendliness. And the 2021 study that we're looking at right now shows that the design related problems referring to components or features that may be functioning properly but are still perceived as problems by owners because they're difficult to understand or to use. So it's one of the things that all the companies need to work on. We've seen this happen in the US as well. When you look at dependability, and here you're looking at over the first 3 years of ownership, here again, lower numbers are better, so that luxury brands are doing better in terms of long-term dependability compared to mass market brands, and the domestic brands also seem to be are close to on average to the other brands, and some of them are actually doing better, as you can see in on the graph here. But again, continuing need to improve in terms of dependability. Though luxury brands are still considered more dependable, their lead for mass market over mass market brands has decreased over the last 5 years. And then dependability of the Chinese brands continues to improve. The gap in vehicle dependability between domestic brands and international mass market brands narrowed from 6 problems per 100 vehicles in 2021 to 9 in 2020. And the domestic brands improved notably in terms of engines and transmission, which decreased by 6 percentage points in 2021 compared to 2020. So that's some of the insights that we have been, things that we have been studying and keeping track of in Chinese automotive industry. And I'm going to move on to our first speaker of the day, Hua Wang. He's the full professor of strategy and innovation management, associate dean of Emlyn Business School and dean of the Emlyn Business School in Asia, and the French dean of Asia Europe Business School. His research interests center on innovation management, foreign direct investment, industrial clusters, globalization strategy of Chinese companies, and the automotive industry in China. He received his PhD from the University of Pierre Mendès in France. Welcome, Juan. Hua.
Hi, Bruce. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. And Hua is going to be joined today by his colleague Giovanni Balsetti,
yes,
who's coming in from Italy. So I think we're ready to go, Hua.
Thanks, Bruce, for offering this opportunity. Hi, everybody. Nice to meet you. In fact, I cannot see you, but I hope that in the following 20 minutes that you can enjoy the sharing of the information. So very quickly, the following presentation will be made jointly by me and Professor Giovanni Barse. The background of this publication is about a book that we recently co-authored by me, by Professor Giovanni Barse and Professor Zhang Wenxian from Rawlings College in the United States. So we have conducted a few studies, both in China and in Sweden, of different business units of Geely Group. And the book has been published by the World Scientific, and it's composed by 13 chapters, if you don't include the conclusion part. So here, due to the time constraint, I will be very quickly go straight forward the point about Geely. In fact, during the presentation of Bruce, you have mentioned about the Geely and as the name. So here we want to dig a little bit deeper. Who is Geely? In fact, this company was founded in 1986. So it's a pretty recent story. Then it went through a very quick expansion. Despite in the very early stage, the China government did regulate the auto industry for the access, even today. As presented by Bruce, you see that in terms of the top 10 Chinese brands, Geely has, in terms of the sales, ranked number 1 last year. If we take a look on the historical evolution of Geely sales, also you can see that it exceeded, almost close to 1.5 million units of the sales, if all the brands at this group being consolidated. While the yellow color bar did demonstrate another kind of the drawback of Geely's story is about the exportation, right? Despite the effort of the expansion, the exportation part remains marginal. In terms of the corporate, here it illustrates kind of the healthy financial situation. It's a profitable company throughout the years. Take a look on the where those cars being produced. Interestingly, you can find that there is there is a big size of the assembling plants, including engine plants, transmission, among the others, and there are also even 4 universities or educational institutions and being part of Geely's group. We can discuss later if we have the time. We will finish our part of the presentation first. Then, in fact, when we talk about Geely, it is we could say that the majority of the business is about the automobile industry. You can find the upper part is about the Geely Auto Group that composed about the brands belonging to Geely of different brands, including the brands being acquired like the Proton and the Lotus, including the joint venture with Smart in partnership with Daimler. And then a Volvo Group is an independent affiliate. Among the others, you can find that the technology group of Geely. Here, one of the core business is about a mobility service, and also sort of a high-tech business like the flying cars that we are going to talk about later. In terms of the vertical integration, Geely did created several education groups, including the universities, so as to educate talents, not only for Geely Group, but also for the industry. In terms of the brand, starting from scratch, Geely's early stage was to produce a people car, right? People's car. And progressively, after the acquisition of the Volvo, it is upgraded to promote itself as a kind of making the safest, the most environmental friendly, and the most energy efficient vehicles. And you can see there are several brands under the Geely's ownership. For sure, here there is a clearer display of different brands. There's no need to memorize all of them. While you know about the Lotus, we are going to talk about the Link & Co. by my colleague Giovanni later. LEVC, in fact, is based on it's an upgraded brand of the London taxi. And the Horizon is the commercial vehicles of the brand. It is worth to talk a little bit about who is the boss, who is the key person behind this company that has been recognized as double-digit growth in the last several decades. The name of the person is called Li Shufu. In fact, he was born from a rural area in the Zhejiang province. And when I talked to the former VP of the Geely Group, the very interesting part, because he directly involved in the case of the Geely Volvo acquisition, the very interesting part to explain why Ford finally decided to sell Volvo to Geely is that throughout the communication, the American business leaders feel that Li Shufu is a kind of a cowboy style and also American style of the entrepreneurship. And that is a very kind of the soft power that further convince Ford to justify that Geely should be a right buyer of Volvo. Here we want to talk a little bit more about Geely's expansion and elaborate a little bit an academic framework to explain how Geely has expanded from a Chinese towards a global player. Maybe Giovanni, you would like to take the lead for this framework that we jointly elaborated?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, William, and everybody. Good morning, everybody. Yes, every chapter of the book tries to provide some elements of theoretical background. About Geely experience, we understand that a sort of twin trajectories can be pointed out. On one hand, the very fast catching up trajectory from reverse engineering to the ability to build their own product architecture. On the other hand, quite a traditional international growth trajectory from exportation to African, Asian countries and the local assembly plants. But the two trajectories seem to converge in a unified strategy that was the asset-seeking acquisitions abroad, and further developing into asset-seeking, global asset integration. Next, please. Next slide, William. Thank you. In multinational growth, there were very significant steps starting about 22 from exports, and the first very significant FDI was the minority participation into London Taxi producer in 2006. And the next steps were highly supported by the new international situation created by financial economic crisis to 2009. Very interesting step was the acquisition in Australia Drive Train System International, that was an operation of acquisition of autonomous drive technology imported and developed in new platforms in China. And of course, Volvo story. After Volvo story, also another very interesting step was the acquisition of British electric startup Emerald Automotive. Next, please. Okay, so in the story of acquisition of Volvo, we can stress that it was due to a long-term strategic vision developing since 2002 within that asset-seeking acquisition trajectories. The search process was very long, and it was incredibly complex operation with 200 lawyers, consultants, banks, and also institutional actors such as 2 provinces and 1 municipality involved in China. The post-acquisition governance was characterized by the slogan, Volvo is Volvo, Geely is Geely. For the first stage was great autonomy. Board of directors of 8 people, just 2 from China, including Li. However, 3 years later, 2013, started clear moves toward technology convergence and the first steps of integration. With the creation of CVT, we'll see next slide. Next, please. That story was a success story because Volvo came back to profitability, to profit making in 2013, and they even reached some historical high level of production. And even in the US, the sales grow. So the impact was positive in the production in Sweden. Here you have in this table the sales and the share of China, as you can see, grew from 28% to 22% in 2019. And so China, the Chinese market was the key of success for Volvo under Chinese ownership. Well, we dedicated a chapter to cross-cultural relations, cross-cultural relations and policies because it was a very hot issue. Initially, there was a very negative reaction by local media, local policymakers, trade unions. Distrust and skepticism dominated. A sort of LOF, liability of foreigners, specific to Chinese multinationals, operated in Sweden in those years. But the very wise strategy of Volvo giving a great autonomy with the expansion of Volvo in China produced positive feedback. Well, the capacity of production increased in Sweden. They went to 3-shift organization, work in historical Torlanda factory, etc. So the expansion in China was in two new factories, in Chongqing and the north, and in Shanghai there was the headquarters and R&D. Next. Well, the R&D innovation product development, the first step was adaptation for Chinese market in Gothenburg. The second step, 1 year later, was the creation of new R&D center in Jiading, Shanghai, for local adaptation. But the significant step was the creation of a CVT, China-Europe vehicle technology in Gothenburg, not close to the old factory, but within a science park. And that was a move towards a platform sharing between Volvo and Geely. Next. The result was this development, this CVT, was a shift from the previous pure asset-seeking strategy to asset-seeking joint creation. cross-cultural cooperation was really at work, with people coming from a great number of countries, and the result was a joint platform named the CMA, based on modularity and innovation. Next. From that platform, the new brand Link & Co was created and launched in China in 2017, with a new generation of something not just intermediate, but joining of efforts on the technology and the new and innovation coming from both companies. So it was the result of that convergence. Next, and maybe William.
Yes. So yeah, here, in fact, after exposing a kind of 11 years post acquisition of Geely on the Volvo case, with the demonstration on how it managed to work out from the design, or in particular platform perspective, in terms of cross-culture management. Here we talk about what has been happened after the acquisition of the Volvo. A very important part is about Daimler that took the stake in Daimler. So in fact, Geely has become the biggest shareholder of Daimler. And right after, it's not only a financial operation. We do see that two joint ventures have been established. One is on the premium ride-hailing business by renting the cars of the Mercedes brand. And another one is the smart car project. And it's very interesting to find out that there is a reverse technology transfer phenomenon. It means that it is Geely that provided the platform of the new electric smart car to Daimler. And they established a global joint smart car company for the sales, for the production and the sales. Secondly is the further upgrading of the London taxi project. And we do see now there are electric version of the London taxi on the route, not only in London, but also in large metropolitan like Paris. Third, we have also seen that in 2017, Geely acquired we should say it's a 51-49 joint venture. So Geely acquired 49% of the equity of Proton and the Lotus. And again, we see not only a new way to substitute the simple exportation, right? Here we are using the acquisition of the asset to expand and access the market. Interestingly enough, that Geely has also anticipated the mobility solutions, or kind of the MaaS, right? Mobility as a service via different projects. So you find out that in different car types, there are different services being expanded. The most important part is the mid-range cars and the platform of the Cao Cao. In terms of size, this is the biggest one. While at the same time, there's incremental and even radical innovations. For the radical innovation, we can find that Geely participated the project like the ultrasonic train, and acquired or co-invested on two flying cars. One is the Terrafugia from the US, a startup company, and another one is the Volvo Copter together with Daimler from Germany. So here, in fact, if we take make a summary on the trajectory of the emerging multinationals, what we in the academic field, what we call is the EMNCs, right? Emerging multinationals. We try to use the case of Geely to understand how the companies from emerging countries developed and eventually to become multinationals. So based on our twin trajectory being published in the 5-6 years ago, we further developed and find out that it is not only an asset-seeking behavior, and then now it is going to a stage of global asset augmentation and creation. This is the new finding from the real business world. It means that the competitiveness of Geely is upgrading and expanding via not only the simple acquisition of the technology from the developed countries or from the developed assets like Volvo, while there is also a phenomenon of co-development of the new technology, new platform. And after this stage, there's still a mechanism to develop its indigenous technology in China, in parallel with the continuous effort of the technology, development, like with Volvo. So this is the interesting finding. We contribute not only to the the business work, but also to the academic research work, trying to fill the gap. So we to try to respect the timing, we go really fast about this. Try to share the element of the core element of this book. So if you want to have the interest to explore a little bit more, you are welcome to buy and read this book, and we are available for the discussion part afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you, Wall. Can you turn off? Yeah, turn off your screen sharing there. Good, good. And we can also have Elario, you can come back and join us. Tom, you can back and join us. And Alex, are you with us now? Still working on it. Okay. Some questions for you. And Giovanni, it's for you as well. I mean, these are what you guys, either you or Wall can answer these, right? When you look at Geely, it's always striking the breadth of projects that they have, as you showed, but it's also the seems to be a lot of overlapping of their automotive brands. You have the Geometry and LinkedIn code, the Geely brand itself, and one that I think is not in your, maybe not in your book, but it's now a new one called Zeekr. I think it's an electric vehicle brand. What's the reasoning behind this? Usually the brands try to separate themselves some way. What do you guys see as the way that the reasoning behind this? We're going to go one question at a time.
Yeah. Thank you for the question. In fact, this is also the one of the remarks that we have mentioned in our book. So in fact, this is a kind of there's no clear to say right and wrong, but while that was the choice of Geely, what we feel first of all is that even today Geely still lack of the confidence to use the brand of Geely to stimulate the sales.
Mm-hmm.
So their strategy is to create the new brand for this or that segment. Yes. Right. So this is the first finding. Second finding, when we talk to the chief designer based in Sweden, interestingly, you can find that the designer has no power to participate the branding strategy. Okay, so it's a separated power. So the brand strategy is at the hand of the Geely Group's top level. So they still are using multiple brands to stimulate the sales. Well, it is still on the way to prove whether it is a successful strategy or not. It is not yet proven. And I'm quite sure that in the future, there will be, again, new brand being popped up. Because even in our slides, there is maybe one brand which is not visible. It's called the Maple. So Maple was an old brand belonging to Geely, almost dead. And during the COVID period last year, suddenly it becomes a kind of a low-end, electric vehicle brand. So it's a sort of mess,
Yeah, that's what it seems like.
Yeah.
And one of the things we've seen in some of the other manufacturers is kind of separate their EV brands from their non-EV brands, kind of as a way of from a financing standpoint within the company, knowing which brands are successful and which ones are not, because they can separate their finances. So that one brand doesn't become a black hole of money, where money just keeps being thrown into it, hoping that something is going to happen. By separating them, you can see, how is this brand doing? They have to fight. It reminds me of the old GM days, where all the different brands had to fight for money allocation to do product development within each of their brands. When you think about it, it's almost like, I don't know if it's similar to a GM model where when GM started doing this, they felt they needed to do internal competition because the external competition wasn't strong enough. Well, that's not really the case with Geely, but so there's probably different reasons for that. One of the other questions that came up is, and you saw it in my slides, how has Geely been doing? You went up to 2019 and 2020 looks like they were one of the higher selling vehicles in China for the domestic brands. And for this year, how are things going for over the last? How do you see things have been going over 2020, 2021?
In terms of the sales, it's still growing.
Yeah.
It's still in a good on a good direction.
Yeah.
And the caution part is that, in fact, Geely has developed several platforms, and electric vehicles is part of their strategy. And by now, compared to those new comers, as what you mentioned, the new among the others, you see that it's not on the tier one players positioning. So here is a kind of the caution to be addressed. So Geely did what I want to say is that Geely did try hard to develop the electric vehicle platform. While in terms of the commercial sales, it has not yet reached the objective. And since everybody are fighting very hard on the new energy vehicles, which is one of the core topics of today, I think that we need to dig deeper to understand the potential risk on losing the battle in this strategic field in the future.
Okay.
Or at least not becoming the tier one players.
Right. Tom, or Elario, do you have anything you want to add?
I have a sort of question on Geely's acquisition strategy overall, and if you look at their trajectory, as Hua has been pointing out, they've been investing in all different sectors over the last decade or so. Where's the money come from? And they must be raising a lot of debt to finance all those acquisitions. And if you look at their sales and profit, it's not going to justify all these investment. And when the return will come, Volvo is probably the only success that we have seen so far. But what about the other acquisitions?
Giovanni, you want to answer this question?
I just have something about Volvo, that you are right. It was maybe the most significant success story. In the case of Volvo, what's very interesting to note is that two provinces in China and one municipality gave money for the acquisition itself. It is exactly the two location of new factories and of new R&D and technology center that was in Shanghai. So, and there was also other other money from financial institutions in China. So there was this local state and state-owned institution taking part to the deal, and they received the investment, the provinces and municipality. So that a side of the story that was quite interesting. And in that case, the results in terms of sales were quite good. So there was a virtuous circle coming from there.
I want to compliment talking because we wrote one chapter about the GD's investment on the Daimler case. Through this case, we can find out that GD is using a very complicated or sophisticated financial mechanism. In fact, they are using several shell companies, and with the involvement of the investment banks, to participate. So there is a kind of a leverage, mechanism to be used so as to successfully, from one side, to acquire the stake of Daimler, while on the other side to minimize the risk on the regulation of the German authorities, right? Because you cannot exceed I think that the 9%, something like that. So it's just below that percentage. So with a group of high performing financial institutions and with a very complex financial structure, that GD managed to acquire the stake of Daimler. So one chapter has dig in details, and for sure we cannot have the access of all the commercial secrets on that, but we did consulted our finance professors to make a simulation of the deal. So there's also detailed explanation on very technical aspect how GD managed to do that step by step.
Very good, thank you, Hua. Elario, when Giovanni was talking about the provincial support for GD, it made me think of the work that you've been working on in terms of the provinces and the support. Do you have anything you'd like to add on this case?
No, I'm actually I'm interested. A lot of my work, and I'll be talking more about it, is the role of cities, actually, and municipalities. So I'm actually quite interested in this, the financial support that the provinces and the development banks. So I perhaps I will reach out later on to Giovanni and Hua to discuss further. But of course, I think it's clear that the Zhejiang government has always been quite close to GD, and also because there has been no other serious state-owned enterprise in the province. I think Geely is clearly the champion, the local champion there. So this is not entirely surprising.
Yeah, it's becomes one of the issues that we have talked about in the past, where the central government may want to have fewer numbers of auto companies, but the provinces themselves are supporting these companies, and they provide investment in their local areas. They provide jobs, and they're not excited about having any of their companies go away. So it's kind of a problem for the central government if they're really thinking about lowering the number of automotive companies in China. In the past, back in 2008, there were like 200. But now there may be fewer of those type companies, but there's more of the NEV companies.
Exactly.
There may be be more companies now than there were in 2008.
Yeah, exactly. So we still find a kind of the persistency of what we called the Chinese federalism, a complex situation between the central and the regional government. As remarked by Bruce, the recent phenomenon is that there is the money, the investment, the capital plays another as kind of a new engine to stimulate the growth of the new industry. So not only the regional government, but hand in hand with if you can call that hot money, to both are the engines to keep hundreds of car makers still today in the China automobile industry.
Yeah. One of the topics that I wanted to dive into a little bit, and I think I've heard your presentation before at the JPISA conference, where Giovanni, and while you were talking about the relationship between Volvo and Geely, and how it developed, and how Geely was going to be Geely and Volvo was going to be Volvo. But I wanted to have you guys talk a little bit more about how that has played out from beginning to where we are today in terms of the integration of the companies.
Giovanni?
Yes. I think in your question there are two sides. The first side is the liability of foreigners, the skepticism in the first years, and in that case it was overcome from the 2013. 2013 was a sort of turning point, because Volvo came back to profits. They went to 3 shifts in Torslanda factories, and so trade unions and local policymakers changed their attitude. So there were very evident practical results that changed. And the convergence started in the same year, quite interesting, with the creation of this technology center, including a huge design facility, very, very international, as the origin of designer engineers. And that was very interesting, because one of the challenges we found was also the idea of luxury car vis-a-vis premium car, because in traditional Volvo experience was not a luxury. It was premium, very safe, very solid, but not exactly corresponded to Chinese or American pattern of a high.
Oh, you can see how things are starting to fade out there. In terms of, things start being a little soft, slower, and then all of a sudden he's gone. Wah, can you pick up or where Giovanni left off?
Yes, I think that that is a kind of Chinese approach of managing the acquired company, right? As Giovanni has mentioned, in the early stage because of a very skeptical perception by the Swedish stakeholders. You know, GD want to separate it. But for sure, as any rational investment, there's the need of at least the technology sharing, or that was the real asset seeking purpose, right? So again, by setting up the CEVT, mainly invested by GD in terms of the capital investment, while de facto recruit hundreds of engineers from the Volvo side, and with a licensing agreement, is a kind of the in-between solutions. The creation of the Link & Co brand is another demonstration, because originally GD want to acquire, you know, share the technology, including engine, whatever, you know, directly with Volvo. The gap of the brand is big, just like in the past, the complaints of the Jaguar clients about sharing the platform of Ford, you know, so they don't want to duplicate the same story again. So the creation of Link & Co in between GD and Volvo, you know, as a kind of a in-between solution, and that is called asset augmentation, asset creation for both sides, right? That does not exist. So this type of step-by-step, you know, kind of the commercial success win the trust, especially from the Volvo side. And the very recent news about the Volvo is that it's becoming a listed company. So as to be, you know, to generate the future growth. So, so that is why through this study we justify it's a Chinese approach of based on the Chinese culture and the Chinese philosophy, Chinese approach, progressive way of acquiring the company, and be justified as a kind of one of the few successful case of the.
That's a very interesting way of looking at it. Well, I think we're going to move on and see if Alex can join us. He's the partner at Plant Moran's Global Services Shanghai operation. He has an engineering background and a Chinese CPA. He's in charge of developing business strategy, supplier identification and assessment, program management, and engineering consulting services. He's responsible for the supplier quality improvement team at supplier sites. And Alex holds a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering and an MBA from the University of British Columbia. Thank you for joining us, Alex.
You're welcome. Thanks for the introduction. So as you know, I'm in Shanghai, so it's about midnight my time. So I hope I can still wake and finish my presentation today. Here, actually, so today I want to share some of our observations about new energy vehicle market in China and the overview of the China supply chain. So these slides, actually, you will see the sales breakdown on the left hand for new energy vehicle and ICE. ICE is the traditional gasoline vehicles. So these are the actual sales numbers starting 2015. So the color in orange is ICE traditional, and the green on the top is a new energy vehicle. So after years of rapid growth, China auto market sales went down for the first time since 2018. The traditional ICE vehicle market in orange keeps shrinking. However, the new energy vehicle keep growing. So from only 331,000 in 2015 to over 2 million in the first 3 quarters of 2021 this year. So even under the pandemic and shortage of chips in China, I think this is a global thing, the new energy vehicle market increased tremendously. On the right-hand chart, you will see in this month, September this year, there have been a 185 percentage compared to same time last year increase. So basically, the new energy vehicle market in China is booming this year. Many people think that China's new energy vehicle growth was largely driven by the government policies. That's true for the first couple of years. But however, from our observation, after the government removed or sharply decreased the new energy vehicle subsidies, incentives, starting in 2019, China new energy vehicle sales is actually increasing. You will see the chart on the right. This shows that the new energy vehicle market actually is changing from policy-driven to the market or consumer-driven, and it has a lot of more room to grow in the future, as we saw. On the left chart, you will see the Chinese government has set like 5-year goal for NEV sales to reach 20% market share by 2025, 40% by 2030, and over 50 by 2035. So a few years ago, this was considered a very aggressive plan. If you look at the trends over here on the right-hand chart, it seems like we have reasons to believe China can meet the first phase 20% goal earlier than 2025, because right now it's already reached over 17% market share in this year. This slide actually shows the new energy vehicle players in China, including the foreign OEM, JV, and Chinese local OEMs. In 2020, the foreign and JV brands about 25% market share for the NEV sales in China. Just Tesla alone takes like 11% of total China EV market. The local Chinese OEMs is about 25% market share. The Chinese traditional OEMs own majority of the market share. We're also seeing more and more emerging Chinese startups and join the competition. Foreign players are also quickly catch up to compete with Chinese OEM in the medium or premium level EV cars. Right now is 14%. Let's take a look at it. Who are the top 10 electrical passenger vehicles OEMs by sales, volumes, market share, as well as the most popular models they sell. You can see among the top 10 sellers, most modules are small, pure electric cars and sedans. Most Chinese OEMs focus on developing the plug-in HEV, so we call PHEV. BYD and SAIC actually have the advantage as the first mover in the development of PHEV, but with the participation of foreign and joint venture OEMs in this sector, the advantage of domestic brand will face challenge in the future. So there's a lot of more opportunity for these foreign automakers. This is a very interesting observation we found about the cost structure between traditional ICE and BEV. Basically the purchase price for a car is comprised by the OEM cost, OEM profit, and the tax paid to OEM and also the consumers. So you will see number one, the BEV, there's low tax to consumers for BEV because the government tax incentives, the consumer tax exempt. Number two, the OEM cost for BEV is 80%, ICE is 55%. So BEV is 25% higher, which is mainly because of the higher cost of batteries. So battery is a key and the core component for electrical cars. So how to reduce the battery cost is very important for electric cars to compete with ICE cars in the future. That's what we can take away from this chart. In addition to battery, actually there are some other components is important too, like an e-drive system, hybrid system, ADAS. This could determine the future of new NEV. The orange blocks are the areas supplied by mostly international suppliers. A lot of core technologies and components in the powertrain, electrical modules, hybrid system, ADAS control are really relying on the foreign suppliers. Let's take a hybrid system, for example. This is all in orange blocks. Actually, China did not include hybrid energy vehicle in the energy vehicle incentives list at the very beginning. So it does not enjoy subsidies in China for this reason. So domestic OEMs are not really motivated to invest in hybrid technology. But last year, China released a new energy vehicle technology roadmap, which clearly point out that all traditional ICE vehicles should be replaced by hybrid power by 2035. So this new policy will drive many OEMs start to think about invest in the hybrid system. But China's hybrid technology is still far behind the enterprise in other countries, like GM Ford in the United States and Toyota, Honda in Japan. So we think there is a big opportunity also for foreign automakers in this area. I have a few slides on the power because the power battery is very important. So I have a few slides about this, but I will very quick walk through this because of I don't think we have too much time. And here this is the global top 10. So based on the installed capacity for the first half of 2020 and 2021, most of the supplier capacity doubled. You can see from the chart, like 2 times increase this year compared to the last year. In this top 10, you probably find out these 6 suppliers from China, 3 from South Korea, 1 from Japan. CATL is the largest one. LG follows as the second largest. Panasonic is the number 3. So come to China market, top 10 for power battery. CATL again is the largest one and almost occupy like half of the market share. CATL actually have a JV and also have set up like a strategic supply agreement with most of the Chinese domestic OEMs. That's why they have a very big market share. BYD builds the battery for its own BEV. So number 2 in this market. LG
it looks like we lost Alex here. Alex, are you back yet?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yeah, you're back.
Okay, great. Sorry. So I'll move forward. So this slide actually tell us the new capacity expansion for battery to support the BEV growth in China market. So CATL and LG are still the two largest players to lead the future growing. In order to, I think the strategy is to maintain the leading advantage in this market. So they have a big investment in the battery. Hello. Can you hear again?
We can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay. So these slides show how the OEMs and battery supplier work together. So let's take example for Tesla. Actually, Tesla JV with Panasonic, and also they acquire Maxwell and Highbar to produce battery in-house, and also the outsource battery from Panasonic, LG, and CATL. But if you look
I think you're on the wrong, I think a different slide here.
Oh,
What slide are you on?
I'm slide on the partnership strategy. Is this?
Yeah, this, I'm seeing the China Power
Oh.
Battery China Top 10.
Oh, I don't know why this.
Why it's not moving?
Yeah.
Now there it goes. All right, key players and trends.
Okay, is a partner strategy, right? Partnership strategy.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So I would just talk about Tesla. Actually, they have 3 models. Actually, they can JV with the key battery suppliers. Also, they will acquire some other company to produce a battery in-house. In the same time, they will probably outsource from the key battery players in the market. So the strategy for the car makers basically is a combination of JV holding or plus in-house production plus outsourcing from suppliers. So you will see all these OEMs do the same thing. From the battery supplier perspective, if you look at the right hand on CATL, actually these guys also set up JV equity investment with some of the OEMs. In the same time, to also set up like strategic supplier agreement with some key OEMs in order to protect their the supply for these other customers. So these slides actually talk about this a little bit about FCV, and this is an emerging market in China. So for cost and risk reasons, CV is primary sector for fuel cell application. In China, the government goal is to have 1 million FCV produced between 2030 to 2035. For Chinese government, the key challenges are the high cost and also technology barriers. There is a big gap in the fuel cell technology between China and the foreign countries. China mainly depends on imports in terms of components that are related to safety and reliability. Infrastructure is another big challenge ahead for China too. We think foreign OEMs suppliers have a greater advantage in this sector, but there's still a long way to go for FCV mass production and the market acceptance. So next one is the battery recycling. Battery recycling is another emerging market in China too. In 2020, the used power battery has reached like 200,000 tons. and will be 780 tons in 2025. So currently, most of the battery recycle companies are really small players, and the lack of like tracking systems. So the OEMs and battery makers will be the major force in the future in this kind of business. This year, CATL actually established a new battery recycle enterprise. 2 years ago, like 2018, BYD established a partnership with a Japanese company to collaborate in renewable energy and energy storage using waste power batteries. BMW also planned to establish a power battery recycle management process in China, together with its dealership networks, and build a battery code tracing system in China. So that with all these opportunities in China automotive market, especially in the new energy vehicle, now they also have a lot of challenging for those automotive suppliers and OEMs right now. So the first challenge actually is the material shortage and drive the cost increase. The commodity price actually increased very significantly in the past several months, such as the steel, copper, aluminum. From the chart on the left hand, you will see the aluminum price increased over 70% just in the past few months, much higher than the US market. A report from JP Morgan Chase says due to the material cost increase, just the material itself, the cost of a car increased the cost about 8%. Actually is 8.3%. That is why Tesla and other auto OEMs announced several rounds of price increase of different models in China and the US. So another issue is the chips crisis. I think all of us know this. Chip crisis also significantly impact not only the China auto industry, but also in the US as well. Because of chips shortage, China cut down like over 10 million vehicles production this year. I heard like in the US, there is like 7.5 or 7 million vehicles cut down in Detroit area. There is a report from a China Automotive Association says China auto production and sales will probably drop down a lot in this month, November and December, compared to the same time last year. Normally the sales actually in China at the year end is very strong because most people get a bonus and they will buy a new car like for Chinese New Year for celebration, you know. So that's really bad for cheap prices for the automotive industry. Magnesium is another hot topic a few weeks ago. Magnesium is critical to automotive industry as well. Over 35% for magnesium go to automotive sheets. But China actually provides around 95% European and the US market supplies for magnesium material. So few months earlier, because of the power and the shortage, the Chinese government shut down like 70% magnesium smelters till by end of this year. But now the power issue gets better in China. So China has allowed some mechanism producer to resume about like a half of the capacity, 50%. But still the supply shortage has affected supply chain for the coming month, as we think. We talk about earlier like a power shortage and outage, so that affect the mechanism. But this power shortage is mainly driven by the euro rising demand for industry electricity, and the increased coal price, and also shortage of coal supply this year, because China has put a lot of efforts to realize the carbon neutral goal for the climate control. So another big reason is the pandemic. China become the sourcing hub for global buyers. So international purchase orders just flood into China. So that will drive like a 20% increase of industrial power consumption earnings this year. So with the big gap between the power demand and the supply, so many industries are under pressure to control energy consumption to a target limit. So the China government have to take ways to curb the power usage of industries and to restrict high energy consumption industry production. That's why they shut down some of the production for some of the manufacturers, especially in Shanghai, Zhejiang, Guangzhou area. But right now, the energy shortage issue gets better, and as China is losing up the power restriction and increase the coal supply. We don't know with the winter coming, so we don't know. We have come back again with a power issue because of the power supply for the living. This is a logistic challenge and cost and lead time. So again, this is by pandemic as well. Cross-border logistic and transportation capacity has been like a seriously reduced. We probably heard a lot of news in the U.S. in the Long Beach port. You will see this picture. There is a very limited like drivers, truck drivers, even pull the containers away. So the speed of loading and unloading containers also first low. So there's a low place to store containers after unloaded. So for this kind of reason, the freight costs increased like 4 to 5 times, and mostly is about like 3,700. Right now is over $20,000 per 40 feet containers. So that also drives the lead time longer to additional like 4 months, from 6 months, from 6 weeks to 10 weeks. This is the foreign exchange and tariff. Foreign exchange, actually, the USD depreciation against RMB. So that will be significant impact on the exporting for China suppliers. That will cut down their the profit. Another one is the tariff. We have been talking this for a long time, and this is we see the tariff mostly add a big portion to the cost of U.S. buyers importing from China. That will make China products a lot competitive enough. So for that reason, a lot of China suppliers sometimes will split the 25%, like half with the customers in order to keep the business. So we also heard some of the China suppliers or the US buyers, we import through like a third-party country, like Mexico, to the US market in order to avoid the tariff. This last piece of my presentation. So in order to make sure you we are doing things right at the first time, so I think supply chain optimization is very important, and you have to get a very solid and long-term strategy here. So basically, this is our service for Permaran in the U.S. and China. So we, over the years, actually, we help a lot of U.S. based companies develop, grow the supply chain or doing business in China through strategic planning under different scenarios. So from the middle size or large or multinational corporation, the challenge and risk that they face is very much different. But based in general, they have put in different phases. So first of all, you want to go to another country like China, you mostly need to have a strategy. Why you want to come in China? So who are your customer and suppliers? And what kind of model you can use to come into this country? So we just set up like a supplier customer relationship, or you want to do like a small office in China as a startup, and then go to another JV or acquisition, or just set up your own greenfield plant in China somewhere. So there's a lot of planning work you can do to protect your investment for long term. So after that, you probably was doing, say, if you want to set a plan in China, how we do that? So what's the most cost-effective way? So how do you get a building? How you go building like buy a land or build your own building, or you just lease? How you work with the government to get a better deal from government incentives, that kind of thing. So after that, you will probably set up your entity. So you will probably you need to go to like site selection, where you put your plant. You put a plant in close to probably your customer. Like if you go supply to GM in Shanghai, you probably want to put in Shanghai area. If you go to Toyota, you probably go to some other area. So which area is better for you? So where you can get the best talents to support your business and growing for long term, and who are your supplier? So you should think about put a plant close to the supplier, that kind of stuff as well. So after you get a plant set up, you get a business license, and then you have a lot of ongoing like complex things in China you have to do, like accounting, tax planning, and also audit, that kind of thing. And when you get a profit, and how you get a profit back to the US. So that is all a lot of thinking on those areas. After that, you probably need some operation support, like how to hire the people, how to get employee relocation. That means how you send the expat to China, and from a tax perspective, and from how to manage the team over there. So, and also the supply chain. We also help you on supply chain development and supplier development. So this is all we do in China and help our clients. Permaran, just for somebody, you probably don't know, Permaran actually is a Michigan-based firm, almost 100 years old. We have 3,300 professionals. We have 25 obviously including China, India, Japan, and Mexico. So primarily in China is about 20 years, and we have serving like over 400 clients set up in China. We have a very diversified team, including engineers, CPAs, business consultants, and program managers. So this is our contact. So Bruce, that is the presentation.
All right, thank you very much, Alex. Very good, very thorough job of looking at a variety of issues related to the Chinese automotive industry in connection with NEVs. I think we can go bring our other speakers back, Giovanni and Ilaria and Tom. Let's see, Alex, can you stop your screen share?
Yes.
Okay. And so we got some questions, things that we want to discuss with you based on your presentation. Now, you had some really neat slide about the cost structure comparing ICE vehicles to NEVs. What do the traditional OEMs who are trying to build both types of vehicles, what do they need to do to be profitable in the future? And how do they make the transition to NEVs and still remain profitable?
That's a good question, but it's hard to, to respond. I would say every OEMs they have the same question, in their mind, how to build to be profitable as a business. But I would say traditional OEMs, I would say BEV, new energy vehicles is the future. So that's period. So they have to invest in this area. So I think the key thing for NEV is the battery. So the battery is the key for them success. So they can either, we talk about all the strategies for a battery supplier like CATL, or for OEMs like Tesla and SAIC. So I think they can learn from all of those, and they need to have a strong strategy on those, either collaborate with some strong battery suppliers like CATL, LG, or other local ones for that. So in terms of making money, right? So actually there's a lot of way. So for the car sales itself, they can generate a kind of revenue. So that probably not a big portion for the traditional, either for the traditional new energy as well. So, but the other thing, the kind of revenue from the like software upgrade and the mobility services. Like in China, if you want to operate your even your system in the car, you need to pay for sort of fee, right? And also the car, like a power charge, also is another kind of like a revenue they can generate from that point. For NEV, new energy vehicle, and I know in the US, like a Tesla, US have a zero emission vehicle plan. So you can get like a carbon credits. So actually I knew Tesla sell a lot of carbon credits and get like a $3,000 per point, and they make a lot of revenue out of that. That's a big portion of the contribution to the overall margin. So in China, we also have the same kind of a concept as well for the Chinese traditional OEM, and also for the AEV cars. So that's get the credit and can sell the credit for as a kind of revenue.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you. Now, we see the foreign automakers representing a small portion of NEVs in China. Do you see that changing once the foreign automakers make the transition to EVs, or do you see Chinese brands continue to dominate the market?
I would see actually the foreign automakers will catch up. Actually, we'll already see the trends where foreign automakers market share slightly increased in the past year. I think the other drivers for foreign makers will play a bigger role in the EV market in China, because the China government incentives and subsidies will gradually remove to those Chinese brands. So the EV market right now is more market driven, a lot of policy or this incentive from the Chinese government. So that will intensively help foreign automakers to be more competitive than the Chinese domestic AEV automakers.
Very good. Thank you. Elario or Tom, or Giovanni, do you have anything you want to add?
Yes, I was curious, Alex had many interesting points, but one that struck me was when you mentioned the power shortage. I was wondering if you see the potential for that, for the power sector reforms that have been announced in October, for those to be raising costs further and in the future, or if you think that's going to be sort of a horizontal thing that's going to affect all sectors, and so it's not going to necessarily affect the NEV sectors disproportionately. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great point. Actually, the power shortage, I think that is part of because of the increase of industry electricity use, because China become like the only like manufacturing side for the global, because we supply to almost the world, because we have better control of the COVID-19. We have the capacity and do that. And also another major reason is the climate control. But right now we almost come back. So China government increased the price for electricity. The main reason is try to control the power used by some of high value or value added industry. Is not that the basically like lower end manufacturers. So
very good. Thank you. Last question for you.
Yeah.
From our audience, have some Chinese car makers announced hybridization plans?
I did not heard that, but I think that will be happen. So that will be the trend for China, because hybrid, this is a China has a like a plan and a policy, and try to push all the automakers in NEV to be like hybrid NEV. So at least.
Yeah, so it sounds like this is something that's happening in the US as well, where a lot of the automakers are expecting to use hybridization before, as well as pure electrics. But a lot of hybridization that will continue probably into the 2030s, they say.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very good. Alex, thank you very much. If you want to stick around and contribute to the other Q&A sessions, feel free to do that. But we understand it is very late for you in China. So if you need to get some sleep, you can do that. In the meantime, we're going to take, let's take a 5-minute break. Okay, welcome back. Before we get going into our next speaker, I want to talk a little bit about some NEV buyer insights that we've seen in the marketplace. When you look at the age distribution, it tends to skew younger for 2021 compared to 2020. And if you look at gender, slightly more females in 2021 than 2020. But primarily a male distribution on NEVs. At the city level, there's different tiers of cities in China based on the size of the city, but also on GDP per capita. And you look at the first tier cities, this is where NEVs, there's most sales take place, but there's some increases in NEVs in the second tier. I'm sorry, there's a slight decrease in second tier cities, increases in the third tier and the fourth tier. Some of this may have to do with the types of vehicles of NEVs that are available. If you looked at some of the sales that Alex was showing, it really showed a combination of micro cars and full-size vehicles available. And what was interesting was that one of the ideas by the government was to have some of these smaller, less expensive micro cars available to the smaller cities. And this is maybe where we're seeing that in the third tier. But still, most of the sales are in the first tier and the new first tier cities. The motivation for how you use your NEV, mostly as a means of transport to work, followed by picking up family and friends, entertainment and short trips. Obviously, you could use these for more than one thing, but not for long trips. One of the things that China, I think, found out, they have a golden week at the beginning of October where they do a lot of traveling, and that people who had NEVs found that they're on the major freeways traveling, that there were long lines of people at areas trying to get their vehicles recharged. So obviously they have a lot of charging stations, but they still need a lot of work in terms of where they are placed. Also, in looking at NEV buyer consideration, why would you buy an NEV? Low cost on fuel, getting the green plate that allows you to go into the major cities without being restricted. There are no restrictions. Sometimes they're also because they're allowing you to get free parking in some of those cities. So, but in particular, it's for the plate and for the low cost of fuel. In terms of design, the people who are considering or buying NEVs like the idea of the over-the-air updates, and that they're willing to actually pay a bit for those the capability to do over-the-air updates, up to 5% increased costs for those. But why are consumers not considering buying NEVs? Range anxiety, lack of charging infrastructure, worrying about whether batteries will last, slow charging times. Those are the main reasons that people are saying, very, very similar to what we're seeing in the US. And expected miles on a single charge also is an issue. They're looking at, here you're looking at kilometers. Really, it's in the high 200s, early 300 miles per charge. That's what they're expecting. The government is also encouraging and subsidizing vehicles that get longer, that can go longer on a single charge. The way that they have set up subsidies in the past have gradually increased the miles per charge or kilometers per charge that they require to be able to get full subsidies. So those are some of just some of the EV characteristics, NEV buyer characteristics. Now I want to look at insights that we've been gaining from our global EV project. This originally was a China EV project, but because of the growth of EVs globally, we've turned it into the global EV project. This is based on the database. So we've created a database of vehicles throughout the world. Here today we're only looking at China. And for example, here we're looking at the relationship between price and range, looking at vehicles in the 2018, 2019, and 2020. Oops, we're gonna go back. And here you see as range increases, price is a little bumpy in 2018. In 2019, as range increases, you can see price not being very similar. Only until you get into the high-end Teslas do you see that. So there's some definitely improvements in the relationship between price and range in 2019. In 2020, same thing. As the range increases, price does not always increase. There are some anomalies here, but it doesn't increase significantly. So there's some, you see the relationship really improving in terms of range and price. And for 2021, it's a much smoother process here, where up until about 22,000, 23,000, you're getting a pretty good deal in terms of range. And to get up to the 300 miles per charge range, you're going to pay significantly more. So that's price and range. And you look at between price and battery capacity. So that as price increases, battery capacity does increase some. As you can see, prices are very similar until you get to the end in 2018. In 2019, very slow growth very slow increases depending on the vehicle. When you look at the average battery capacity, kilowatt hours, it's a little bumpy, but it's still and stays pretty high until you get to the high end. In 2020, again, very similar to 2019, and 2021, it's really some good deals in terms of battery capacity, where the average price is pretty low and you still get pretty decent battery capacity. Not all vehicles are represented here. It's one of the weaknesses in the database in terms of trying to get full data on all the different areas. When we're looking at battery power and torque. So as torque increases, battery power tends to increase. 2018, same for 2019 with some anomalies. In 2020, very similar, and 2021, very similar. So power and torque are very nice, tightly tied to each other. But then when we were looking at full brands, that brands have all the different models, we were combining all the trim levels of brands. Here we're looking, in this slide, we're looking at individual trim levels. So for example, the Baojun E100, the 200, and the 300. You're looking at the average price and also the range of the vehicle. So when you look at the ones that we're looking at here, the Baojun 100, the price is around 10K, and for the 100, the range is about 100 miles, but for the E300, it's about almost 200 miles for about the same price. So here's where it shows you where we're having differences in different trim levels that have, and this could be different issues related to that. It could be other things that are adding to the price of the vehicle. Now, all the prices that we're looking at do not include subsidies. So it's really just the manufacturer's suggested retail price. If you look at the Aura that we have here, where the Aura ES11 versus the Aura IQ, you've got very similar, different pricing. One is a little over 15,000. The other one's closer to 30,000, and their range is actually in the opposite direction. So it shows you the effects of this is with the more in the small car areas. In the domestic large car areas, we really don't see that those any of those issues. This is looking at BYD vehicles and all the different trim levels for BYD vehicles. And here you see that as whatever the price is, the average range is very similar. And so as price goes up, the range goes up. And it's pretty nicely correlated. So for the large vehicles, it may not be as big of a deal. We show this just to show you that there are differences within the same brand about how those vehicles might be relating to price and range. When you look at, we've talked a little bit about this already, the growth in NEV sales from 2019 to 2021. We're expecting that, and it may be that China will double their number of NEVs sold in 2021 compared to 2020. Despite doing this despite a decrease in internal combustion vehicle sales. So they're right now they're already at almost 2.2 million vehicles, NEVs, which is a 219% year-over-year increase. The penetration rate is almost 13%. In 2020, the overall for the whole year was 5.8%. So it shows you the growth. And in the luxury market, NEV penetration has reached almost 30%. And when you look at who are selling the NEV models, the top selling brands accounted for more than 65% of the total sales in the first 3 quarters of 2021. The battery swapping is another issue that we've been looking at for a while now. Now, battery swapping was tested by Renault and Nissan back in 2011, and it failed to really gain support from customers and other automakers. But as a luxury maker, NIO, the car maker in China, has jumped back into battery swapping with a game plan to locate swapping stations strategically around main sales hubs, while at the same time allowing users to charge using typical battery charging stations. Now, as of October 21, 2021, NIO has 614 battery swapping stations. 40% of the NIO users live in their swap station district houses, which refers to a residence within 3-mile radius from a NIO battery swap station. And this percentage went up by 11% from the previous month. NIO expects 90% of their owners to live less than 3 kilometers away from one of their stations by 2025. And right now, the ratio of vehicles to swapping stations is 272 to 1. Now, around 30 other automakers have jumped in to the battery swapping business, with nearly 60 battery swappable vehicles already launched. But there's some big issues related to battery swapping. There's a reason that it did not survive in the past. One is that there's differences in voltage platforms, especially among different brands, different battery pack dimensions, depending on different brands, storage of different packs for different vehicles, changing battery technology from year to year, and actually having moving packs from station to station. These are very large and expensive things that would have to happen for this to happen. Now, across, if you had a particular charging station that would service multiple brands at the same time, NEO is saying we're just doing this with our brand, so we really don't have some of these issues, but they're probably going to run into some others. But the Chinese government is not only supporting battery swapping; its main support is for building battery charging stations. So as you can see, as of October 2021, they have about 1 million public stations, about a little over 1 million private chargers, for a total of 2.3 million chargers. And compare that to where the US is in terms of thinking about their charging station, where the federal government is going to support the building of 500,000. Well, that's a good start, but as you can see, there's when you really want to have a lot of NEVs going around, you're going to need lots and lots of chargers. Okay. For policy questions, let's see, can we go back to those? And this is something that we're still not sure about. How long will the central government subsidies last? Some of the prior announcements were for subsidies to phase out by 2022. When will manufacturer requirements for a certain percentage of all their vehicles to be NEVs begin? And what are the penalties for reaching those goals? That's something that we're still waiting. We're still searching for. We've had some things about this in the past, but we're really not sure about what's going on right now. And we talked a little earlier about how about what happens when the global foreign automakers really come in with electric vehicles to China. Well, the announcements are coming fast and furious, and most of the things are supposed to happen by 2025, which is really, in automotive years, not that far from now. So VW expects to deliver 1.5 million new energy vehicles per year. Now, remember, they're selling about 2 million, maybe, or 2.5 million this year just for all companies. BMW is aiming for 25% of all their vehicles to be all electric by 2025. Mercedes-Benz is launching 2 vehicles, and Honda is going to introduce to China all new models that will be electrified. Now, when they talk about electrified, they're talking about hybrids as well as BEVs. But they're going to introduce 10 Honda branded EV models in China. And these are expected to be exported from China. Toyota plans to roll out a total of 10 full electric models in China by 2025, and also focusing on hydrogen fuel cells. Nissan's plan to roll out 6 e-power vehicles by 2025. GM, more than 40% of new models launched in China will be electric by 2025, and plan to roll out 30 Ultium-based EVs globally by 2025, and 20 of those will hit the Chinese market. Ford plans to launch 30 new Ford and Lincoln vehicles to Chinese consumers in the next 3 years, of which 10 will be electrified vehicles. Again, electrified can be hybrids as well as pure EVs. And Hyundai Kia plan to release all electric vehicle models every year in China starting next year, and expand their NEV lineup to a total of 21 models by 2030. Again, they're including HEVs, hybrids, as well as fuel cell vehicles. So here come the foreign automakers. So that's all I have to say in terms of some of the insights that we have from our global EV project. And now I think we'll move on to our next speaker, Elario Mozako. Elario, are you with us?
Yes. Hi,
there
can
you
you hear
go.
me?
All right, I can hear you.
Let me share my screen.
And let me give you a little introduction. Elario is a fellow with the trustee chair in Chinese business and economics at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. She holds a PhD from Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies, where her dissertation investigated Chinese industrial policy by focusing on electric vehicle promotion efforts and the role of local governments. She also holds a master's degrees from Johns Hopkins and Central European University, as well as a bachelor's degree from Bard College. Welcome, Elario.
Thank you. So I'm going to apologize in advance because I'm a bit sick, so I don't want to talk too much. So I might shorten my presentation a little bit and leave more time for the Q&A. So what I'm going to do today is take a bit of a step back compared to the other very interesting presentations and provide a little bit of an overview of the history and evolution of an electric vehicle, well, really new energy vehicle promotion policy in China. Especially looking at the role of government, central government, local government. So that's sort of the agenda here. I'm also going to give you a bit of an example of how this works in practice by looking at how Shenzhen did it. Shenzhen obviously being one of the models for sort of electric vehicle capital of electric vehicles, basically, and then give a bit of a sense of where we're headed right now. Before we even start, I think it's worth noting, I think it came up in the conversations previously that, the traditional automotive industry in China has always been very fragmented and has been a bit of a challenge for the central government. There's always been the idea that the joint ventures were supposed to bring new technologies to China and really launch the domestic Chinese industry. And that sort of, not necessarily failed entirely, but it certainly did not play out the way perhaps that the central planners would have liked. So electric vehicles were really launched initially. The electric vehicle promotion policy, the strategy behind this was actually to sort of ensure that China would dominate a new technology in the future. So that's sort of how it started. We can see it's going pretty well, right? I'm sure everybody's seen some variation of this graph in the past. Where we can see that, that at this point today, about half of the stock of passenger electric vehicles are in China. Now, the reason why I liked having this table is to show that really there's a change in 2015, 2016, right? That's when really becomes clear that the market is taking off in China, and China really becomes a leader in electric vehicles. So the way to think about it is not just the policies that were in place and put in place in 2015, but rather the ones that were in place before that enabled this. And then I'll talk you through a little bit the changes that were driven by the way in which the market actually did take off. So the way I like to break it up is, certainly there were policies in place before 2009, 2010. They were mostly focused on research, R&D of electric vehicles. But in 2009, but really 2010 is when we start seeing the first policies to promote the marketization. So actually ensuring that the industry was supported in producing electric vehicles and that there was a market for those electric vehicles once they were actually produced. So this phase until 2015 or 2016 or so, local governments were central to this process. In part, that's because it was not really a core priority for the central government. This was managed through the Ministry of Science and Technology. Some have defined it as sort of a pet project of the minister at the time, who was an auto person, an auto expert, came from Audi originally. But at this time, local governments are sort of given a free hand. There's pilot programs. There's demonstration programs, both for the electrification of fleets for buses and taxis, as well as private vehicles. So 2011 is when 6 cities were selected to actually start providing subsidies in addition to the central government subsidy. So consumers, and I'll talk more about this, but consumers could benefit both from a subsidy from the central government and local government, depending on where they live, basically. And by local government here, I'm talking about cities, really. And this initially was 6 cities. It was quickly expanded. And at this time, not only were there subsidies, but local governments were sort of encouraged and clearly adopted a variety of different policies, some relatively creative, I would say. what happens in around 2015 is that the market actually starts taking off. So this becomes really expensive for the central government. A lot of subsidies are being handed out. And at the same time, there's a sense that the volume is being reached, but the quality is not necessarily as high as planners would have liked. So this is when also there's, and I think Alex mentioned this, right? There's a shift towards more market-based tools to promote electric vehicles. There's a policy is seen as too dominant. So the central government really steps in and starts cutting back on subsidies. So central government subsidies are there's a schedule for the reduction of subsidies, and local government subsidies are pegged to central government levels. So this is the moment in which local government action is sort of reined in somewhat. This is also a time in which it really emerges that local governments had sort of, that there have been instances of local protectionism. There have been instances of embezzlement by the part of companies with sometimes, with local government sometimes, turning a blind eye to what was happening. Or at least, this is what started emerging with several investigations that took place in this period. So between 2015 and 2019, not only do we see a cut down in subsidies, but we actually see the development of the dual credit policy, which is in place today. And Bruce, you mentioned that we still don't know exactly how implementation is progressing on that front. But it's really developed in this phase, and this is also when policy shifts from the Ministry of Science and Technology to the Ministry of Industry and Information Technology. So that shift should give you a sense of where the government saw the industry moving from more of a science and technology research project to something that's much more has much more to do with industry and scaling and production and manufacturing. So what we've seen since 2019, well, of course, 2020 has been a strange year in most countries, including China. So 2019 was the year in which local government subsidies were phased out, and 2020 was supposed to be the year in which central government subsidies were phased out as well. Now, of course, what happened is after COVID, economic shock, so the central government decided to extend the subsidies until next year, and some local governments have actually reintroduced subsidies as well, including Shenzhen. So there's been a bit of a turnaround there. That said, we're talking about relatively small amounts of money at this point. We're talking about less than $3,000. So it's much less significant than a few years ago when we're talking about perhaps a combined amount of maybe $1,800. $18,000. I'm sorry. Yes. So now why do local governments matter? This goes back to the fact that in the automotive sector, local governments have always been quite involved, actually. So if you look at some of the most dominant companies today, right, like SAIC, even BAIC, these are all companies where the local government is a major shareholder. There's even some other companies that like Cherry, which some don't even realize is an SOE. So the local government has actually always been a active stakeholder in the automotive sector, and it's actually, as Bruce has mentioned before, also motivated and been a reason why we have so many manufacturers in China. Right. So there's a very long tail if you look at production versus or sales versus the actual number of automakers in China. So there's actually the majority are concentrated. Majority of sales are concentrated in perhaps the top 10 or so. But then you always have a large number of other companies that never really go out of business because they have the support of local governments. For the most part, that's what happens. Now, of course, local governments actually have a long history of industrial policy in general in China. So this is not something that's unique to the automotive industry. You can see this in a lot of other industries as well. And in part, it's been sort of a motor of growth in China as well. But it has come with its own shortcomings and inefficiencies, obviously. So as I mentioned before, around 2010 to 2011, you start having these pilot programs to promote electric vehicle sales, right? So the market, but also the industry itself. And I'll just go into what those tools were, and subsidies being one of the main ones. And the other thing I note is cities being sort of at the forefront of promotion of electric vehicle sales is not unique to China. What is more unique is perhaps that the local governments, both provinces and cities, are actually involved in sort of promoting the industry itself. So actually supporting manufacturers as well as creating, sort of enabling the creation of a market. So that's what I would say here. And in fact, as I mentioned, there's been an evolution of what the role and what the tools available to localities, to local governments have been in China. So what are these tools that I'm talking about? So there's local demonstration pilot programs. So this involves both, a variety of different tools, but it also just includes the responsibility of the government to actually demonstrate that electric vehicles work. So if you go to Shanghai, they actually had a place, a center where you could go and take, and take a drive in an electric vehicle and sort of see that it was actually tested out, basically a testing center for potential consumers. As I mentioned, purchase subsidies for private consumers was central until recently. I think at this point is no longer a driver, or at least not as strong a driver as it was perhaps 5 years ago. Manufacturers received extensive support for a variety of channels, which again is not unique to the automotive industry in China, but is quite common for manufacturers to receive some sort of support for land or tax breaks and other tools. Public procurement is actually sometimes overlooked, but it was really central, especially in the first few years. And we'll talk more about how, for example, in Shenzhen this played out. Excuse me. And not only did this come with a mandate for fleets like bus companies, taxi companies to electrify their fleets, but it also came with a set of subsidies from the central and local government to ensure that this was, to encourage this shift. Again, some of those subsidies have been criticized because they were so high that the company was basically not paying at all for the buses. But this I would say has changed in recent years. We're talking about maybe 2015 or so. There were a whole series of other non-financial incentives, like license plates was really crucial, I would say, after 2014, when they were first, these license plate restrictions were first introduced in several cities. So there's long waits to get license plates in several cities in China, including Beijing, or you have to pay a pretty high price, for example, in Shanghai, where there's an auction system. So there's facilitations in both cases in most of these cities if you want to buy an electric vehicle. Although I've heard that the wait in Beijing now has become very long for electric vehicles as well. So if anybody knows the current wait times, I'd appreciate getting an update on that. There's, of course, the discounts on parking and charging infrastructure. I should note, it's certainly the central government that's been pushing this, but at the end of the day, local governments actually have a lot of control on land, and they actually coordinate where the charging infrastructure is built, if it is built, and how it is managed. So again, local governments are actually quite important in this, and they will continue to be very important in this area. Since 2019, we've had this dual credit program, which it really has taken away the power from the local governments to the central government. So it's part of this re-centralization process. And here, local governments don't really seem to have much of a say at all. Not necessarily a bad thing, especially if you're trying to move away from a sort of policy-driven market to more market-driven market. And so I think that's the biggest trend at this point. This is just to note, just to give you a sense, maybe I should have shown this slide earlier, but this to a sense of how high these subsidies were and how much they've fallen since then. And as I mentioned, if you look here at the local government subsidies after 2020, there's actually been a bump up again in certain cities like Shenzhen, where they have reintroduced temporary COVID subsidies for purchases of electric vehicles. But again, there is the subsidies are supposed to fall by another 30%, I believe, next year. So it's the central government subsidies, that is. So I think we're going to be looking at something that's around just over 10,000 RMB per vehicle. So in this, I should note, this is for the maximum amount possible that a vehicle is eligible for. So this here in these phases, we're looking at vehicles that have a range of over 400 kilometers. So that's more the more advanced, technologically advanced vehicles. If you're looking at a hybrid, a plug-in hybrid that is, or a vehicle with a lower range, then the amount of money, the subsidy they're eligible for is much lower. So this is sort of just an overview. So getting a little bit, into what this looks like in practice, Shenzhen, I think, is a very good, case because, of course, it's home to BYD, and because it's been extremely successful in expanding the market. It is one of the leading cities in terms of electric vehicle sales. And it should be noted, yes, Shenzhen is a very large city, but it does punch above its weight in the sense that it is directly competing with cities like Shanghai and Beijing, which have twice as many inhabitants, basically. So certainly a much larger market in terms of vehicles. So the fact that Shenzhen has performed so well is notable. So what did they do? It's some of these tools that I already mentioned, right? So public procurement was really central. They electrified their entire bus and taxi fleet by 2018. So this means that we're talking about tens of thousands of vehicles. Most of these were supplied by BYD. So this was a real boon to BYD, and it actually helped establish a sort of a system, a model that BYD could bring to other cities where it has been very successful in selling taxis and buses. So, it could show, look, we did it in Shenzhen. It worked out really well. And we have a financing model that we developed and that that worked well in Shenzhen. And so this was actually a really good system that worked well both for Shenzhen and BYD. Of course, perhaps other companies might have to, complaints about just how open the procurement contracts were and how competitive they were, which is up for debate. BYD itself, the presence itself of BYD, which was already a successful battery business by the time that Shenzhen established its pilot program, I think really benefited. It created a very positive, the basis for a positive relationship, right? So the city had a local champion it could rely on when it wanted to achieve the targets set by the central government, and the company itself had a reliable partner when it came to creating a market and providing incentives for consumers. There were generous subsidies. If I go back here, you'll see that Shenzhen had some of the highest subsidies available for private consumers. And there was a lot of early investment in charging infrastructure. Again, all this was sort of done by the city before 2015, before they were already spearheading some of these areas by 2012, 2013. So this went in, at the time in which the country as a whole had very few electric vehicle sales, and this was definitely not a priority at the central government level. In a way, Shenzhen showed that it could be done, even though the Shenzhen model has, some elements have been adopted by other cities, but perhaps not the entire package. Finally, it's worth noting that Shenzhen now has been focusing on the other fleet electrification, so logistics, car hailing companies. So this, obviously fleets are somewhat of a low-hanging fruit, because if you get a contract, then you can electrify the entire fleet rather than going consumer by consumer. So there's actually a research center that focuses on this in Shenzhen, but in general, they've been quite aggressive in trying to make that shift happen. So that was sort of an example of how it works on the ground. I should say, up until now, I've been sort of telling you how local governments there's been a retreat of the local government and the central government and centralization. There's been recentralization, and also there's been more of a, more market-driven. It's more of a market-driven industry now, especially with I didn't even get into the dual credit system. I apologize, but as I think Alex mentioned, the dual credit system really sort of shifts. There's a shift from it's no longer the government that provides incentives for consumers, but it puts the onus on manufacturers to actually produce a certain amount of electric vehicles, and it really sort of puts the responsibility on them to sell it. Now, of course, as Bruce mentioned, there's questions of how the implementation is proceeding, but on the whole, this has been sort of a big incentive for it is more of a market-based tool, and it's been a big incentive for manufacturers. Now, that said, we've seen the case of NIO, which received a big injection of funds from the Anhui government, is quite interesting, right? So this is like a local government, of course, sort of taking over, or partly, becoming an investor in a company that was originally private. Then, in addition to that, as I mentioned, there's been some local governments that have introduced purchase subsidies. In addition to that, I should say there's some subsidies never went away. There's some cities have charging subsidies. Some subsidies for charging electric vehicles. Some others have usage subsidies for fleets. So if you use you can prove that you've used a certain amount, your company gets a refund. And then, of course, this is always going to be an issue, or not necessarily an issue, but a trend, is that local governments are always going to compete to attract investment from manufacturers. So I think that concludes sort of all my throat can manage for today in terms of speaking, but I look forward to any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Elaria. Very nicely done, telling the story of the provinces, what's going on in the provinces and the cities, right? This is a very interesting model for, China itself, of course, is a very interesting model. When we look at the government leaders at the provincial level, and most likely at the city level as well, these are not elected officials, are they? They are appointed by the central government. Is that true?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that? I think my internet broke up for a second.
Are the leaders of the provinces and the cities, they're not elected officials, they are appointed officials, right?
Yes, of course, right? So they're responsive to the top rather than the bottom in that sense, right?
Right, right.
Yeah. And the way it worked, in general, how it works in China often is that the central government may set some sort of broad objectives, and then often local government officials are encouraged to be quite creative in sort of meeting those targets, in finding new ways. So actually, I sort of mentioned that some cities were creative, but I thought Hangzhou was actually a very interesting city. They actually experimented a lot with battery swapping in their taxi fleet. They had a lot of programs to promote electric car sharing, very small car sharing. And these were all ways in which they thought that they might be able to expand the market at a time in which they thought that the private consumer was not the right target. This was around 2014 or so. As it turned out, a couple of years later, the private market really exploded, right? So these experiments didn't really pan out the way that they thought. But it was a very creative sort of business model that the city sort of, in collaboration with the companies that were actually supplying the vehicles and the batteries and doing the battery swapping, they were quite creative in that sense.
Right, and I think what it does is it shows the consumers see this happening. They may not be private vehicles, but they see the government, and I'm sure it's talked about in the news about what the government is doing, and they were doing this, and so if they're on buses that are all electric, they see what those are like. So it may have had an influence on buyers in terms of building confidence in the technology, as the cities were doing this originally before it became more of a consumer market.
Yes, certainly. I mean, if you talked a couple of years ago, I spoke with people who are involved in these initiatives in Shanghai, and they said, we can't quantify how much of an effect it had that we had a car park where you could drive around your EVs, but most people that were driving them had never seen an EV. they
Right.
didn't know. And they said, it was probably more impactful at the early stage, because later on, they knew what an electric vehicle was, and there were taxis that were electric or at least hybrid in Shanghai, and people were much more familiar with it. But certainly there was the idea of, obviously the US can't really replicate this in the same way, but China does have a lot of fleets, both public fleets, public transit fleets, right? So taxis, buses. So by, this was a very good way for a country to leverage that advantage in that sense by electrifying those fleets first.
And I think that was something that the US has talked about doing, but they really haven't done it. I think the biggest example of that was the US postal fleet that recently gave out a really large contract to a company that's going to make internal combustion engine postal vehicles. And you go, this was the perfect opportunity to actually make the transition. And these vehicles stay on the road for at least 20 years. So, you're giving a, 400,000 vehicle fleet an opportunity, and you have an opportunity and you don't take it. So I think it's, when you say, the US can they actually learn something? They can learn something by how other governments, and this is European as well, how they are attacking this issue. How are they making the transition? And do you see the potential for, in the US, at the state level, some of these things happening? Of course, California being the example, right? Of how states could actually, as the provinces do their, not completely do their own thing, but do some of their own thing, right?
Well, of course, California has been a leader. In fact, the dual credit program that I mentioned is actually modeled off of the zero emission vehicle mandate in California. So in a way, California actually inspired China in many ways. There's been a close collaboration on many of these issues. Certainly, I think that states in the US have been at the forefront of actually a lot of climate initiatives as well. So I think, electric vehicles in the US perhaps fall more neatly into the climate category than even in China. And certainly I think there's a lot of space there. My understanding is for public transit in the US, first of all, it's much smaller. So we just don't have that many buses in the US, which is another issue. But it's the financing, right? It's how do you actually pay for them, and it's very patchwork in the US. So it's much, in a way, it is up to local governments in the US to figure out how to do it, because there's not that much of of course the federal government does provide a lot of funding, but it's not quite as standardized as it is in some other countries, right? So there's perhaps more space for initiative there. I think there was a lot of talk of electrifying school buses. I think that would have been a great opportunity in the US, also considering the impact on the health of children to be exposed to diesel buses. And
there's still talk about this. It's not a dead letter, but it's something that it really you haven't seen it yet. It's more like R&D. We're still in the R&D phase.
Yeah. I think in a way it's less advanced than regular buses, perhaps because school buses are more uniquely American thing compared to some other types of buses. But I'm not an expert there, so I would love to hear other people. I actually think Europe might in many ways be a better example for the US to follow than China, just because some of the mechanisms in China are relatively unique and not quite as transparent in some ways. And so I think some of our institutions are closer to those of Europe, and there's a lot of initiatives there that could be looked at. But of course, that's depends on the case.
All right, last question for you. Bigger picture. US is talks about, and you talked about transparency, and the US talks about, the trying to measure how much government support is going into different industries, which is kind of counter WTO frameworks for, from what's going on. So how does the U.S. measure how the Chinese are actually supporting their industries in a way to make any kind of argument, for, well, if you guys are going to do this, we're going to do this kind of stuff? How do they measure those things?
I think that's the $1 million question. Certainly, there's a lot of debates right now in DC surrounding that. I myself am working on a project that looks at this. And I can tell you there's no single way of looking at this. There's still a lot of open debate, not just for China, I think most countries. And in fact, I would say in some cases, many governments don't even quite know how much is spent it may be that most governments don't even know exactly how much they're spending. And that doesn't even just apply to China. But I would say this is an area that's getting a lot of attention, and there's probably going to be more being published on this in the future. So that's I'm
wondering if it looks like that China is introducing and allowing some of the investment banking firms, the JP Morgans, to come to China now and set up business. I wonder if some of those type of things, once they that will require them to drill down into company finances, to be able, if you're going to do investments in areas, you're going to have to understand as best as you can what's actually funding those companies, right? And is it really from profits from selling stuff, or is it profits from based, or if profits, if at all, from support from governments? And I think that, I wonder if that might be one of the issues going forward that will force more transparency in China. What do you think?
That may be. I mean, I think the challenge in understanding the challenge in quantifying just how much state support there is in China is that you can look at different categories, right? So you can look at direct subsidies, and that's what I've been talking about here. And I'm not going to say it's, we know exactly, but, you can look at listed firms, and we know how much listed firms receive, and that's pretty straightforward, right? And you can have tax cuts and tax credits, but then you have access to credit, right? And so that's a lot more complicated. Sometimes in China, the problem isn't even whether or not, what interest you're getting the credit, which is a debate that exists. Are companies receiving below credit financing? But it's also which companies actually get access to credit, right? And there's a lot of evidence that, for example, state-owned enterprises get more credit, or certain types of target companies in certain target industries, for example. In addition to that, there's state guarantees, right? That's very difficult to quantify. We're seeing that debate right now playing out in the construction sector in China, the real estate sector, right? Some companies don't fail, or they get saved. NEO got an injection from basically the state, right? So that's another type of support, right? That's much harder to quantify. In addition to that, public procurement, I mean, I mentioned it is a very positive thing that was done in China for electric vehicles, but of course it is, if it's not competitive procurement, then not only, probably the state was might be overpaying for some things, but more, relevant to this is Chinese companies, and in some cases in China, it's like local companies within China benefit disproportionately, and so you might not have there's an access to market issue for foreign companies. So these are just some. There's many more issues, and so that's what makes this challenging to quantify. So I think I hope, as you say, that the more interaction with more presence of foreign financial institutions might help promote more transparency. But I think some things, even if you are transparent, it's just very hard to understand exactly how much of an impact they've had and how they even compare with what other countries are doing. In some ways, they're somewhat unique. Yeah.
Your story about BYD is a very interesting one, because BYD is the only car company that actually makes its own batteries and actually sells its batteries to other companies. And they're not at the same level as CATL is, because CATL is selling only batteries, right? And battery management systems and everything that go along with it, right? But it's an interesting story in the company and the exporting of BYD buses throughout the world. One of the probably major success stories in the auto industry of exporting from China. And actually, I think they may actually be building BYD buses here in the US.
California.
California.
Yeah,
There's a battery assembly factory in California as well, I believe.
Yeah. The first Chinese auto company, right? In the US. Yeah, I think it's a fascinating story from that perspective. All right, I'll let you go. You can, if you want to stick around for Tom's talk and kibitz about what he's going to talk about, feel free to do that. But I know you're under the weather a little bit today, so you're on your own.
Thank you so much. This is very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elario. Okay, Tom.
Yes.
Tom Tao teaches strategic management and competitive intelligence at the Alfred Lerner College of Business and Economics at the University of Delaware. He received his PhD in strategic management and international business from the University of Pittsburgh in 2004. His research focuses on alliance portfolios and competitive intelligence. Welcome, Tom.
Hi, everyone. Glad to be here. And since I'm the only thing between you and your lunch, I'll be quick, and I'll try to be to the point.
Well, I may not be quick, Tom. I have many questions for you.
But let me share my screen. So the background of this observation is that I've been sort of monitoring the auto industry in China for about 2 decades. And this is the start of this observation is really on my PhD dissertation, and I'm trying to see how these multinational corporations going into the Chinese market at the very beginning. And basically, the research was observing what has happened in the early stage and in the sort of introduction stage and the growth stage of the entire industry. And if you're looking at this evolution of the auto market from 1996 to 2009, this is the period where the entire industry demand really starting to lift off or jump up. And you're starting to see this huge growth in this period, where you will see 30% year over year, 40% year over year, which is a very, very exciting time for that entire industry. Now, the multinational corporations went into the Chinese market at different time, at different scale, different commitment level. And from this picture, you are going to see the relative market share, the evolution of relative market share of these major automakers in the early times. And then you can see that the first movers like Volkswagen, Beijing Jeep, that's Chrysler, and Peugeot, and a few others, they enjoyed great market share, and they enjoyed great profit at early stage. And then you're starting to see other companies gradually jump into the picture in later stages, like GM, Ford, Toyota, Honda, and so on and so forth. And when these companies joining the market, and the intensity of competition certainly went up significantly, and then you're starting to see the much closer market share distribution among all these players towards the 2006. And things get a little bit more interesting when the domestic players starting to emerge around this time too. And then it's starting to get into the lower end of the market and starting to gradually went up the technology ladder. Now, if you think about the entire history of the auto industry so far, and we basically have observed the introduction stage of the industry life cycle, the growth stage, And we are probably looking at the mature stage and even the declining stage of the industry. That is the ICE-based dominant design. And we're starting to see the growth slowing down drastically. And we are also seeing the entire industry sales starting to plateau and also dropping down. Now, some of you may say this is just a transitory phenomenon, but chances are this is going to be the beginning of the end for the ICE dominant design. And so for that industry or the firms still relying on ICE-based autos, this is definitely not a good time for them. And on the right-hand side, you are seeing the electric drive that's rising up drastically over the last few years, and really took off around 2015, as previous speakers has been mentioning. And in the last 5 years, we are really seeing this particular sector or this particular design starting to emerge as probably the next phase of the industry evolution. So I sort of overlay these two pictures together, and you're starting to see almost a classic industry life cycle and technology life cycle transition. And then we're witnessing that transition right now. You're starting to see the old industry, which is ICE based, and starting to rise to the very top, but starting to go into declining stage. And you're starting to see the new, the next dominant design starting to emerge and starting to really jumping up really fast. And this electric sales prediction is rather conservative, and based on what we have talked about this morning, I think the number or the growth rate will be higher than what is shown here. And that again accelerated the transition from ICE-based to electric drive, which is, if you also consider the government push or the climate issue, that will really accelerate this transition. So this is definitely one of the macro environmental issues, whereas government policy is at play and also technology transition is also at play. Now, I used the topic of the innovator's dilemma. I want to talk about the strategies of these firms going into the industry, going through the industry life cycle over time. So if you think about the Clay Christensen's argument about why these large companies will most of the time fail versus the innovators or disruptive innovators. And if you look at this picture on the left-hand side, this is the ICE as the dominant design. This is, and if you have to pick one company here, this is maybe Volkswagen. And this is the picture or the evolution path they have gone through to come up with the design that's gradually being improved over time. And sooner or later, the old dominant design will become quite sophisticated, quite advanced, but it's going to get to a level where it's beyond the customer's demand, beyond the customers are looking for in the old performance measures. And the price gets a little bit more expensive, and the industry becomes stable, mature, and they're looking for more on the scale, on efficiency, rather than new innovation features. Now, on the right-hand side, you are going to see some disruptors based on Christensen's notion that they will come in at a relatively low cost or a low quality entry. One example of this is Geely. And they came in with a relatively sort of poor design, low quality, but it fits the need of the customers that's only looking for some basic transportation tools. So they come in with a relatively low quality or simple design, but it fits the bill, fits the demand for the entry-level customers, and they will get into the industry through that door. But gradually, they will improve their quality, improve their technology, and getting into a competitive situation or getting into a competitive capacity, and that's going to disrupt the old industry players. Now, in recent years, we see the emergence of Tesla as the new player getting into the industry, and some argue that this is another disruptor to the old industry. And one argument about Tesla's move is that they started from more or less the top. They started from as a differentiator, come up with a high performance, high price, high feature sort of entry strategy. And they gradually move down the technology ladder and get it more to the lower end of the customers, where you're starting to see the Roadster as the entry, and then you Model X, Model S, and then you're starting to get the Model 3 at this point, and then gradually getting to the mass market. So this is definitely causing trouble for the multinational corporations like Volkswagen, like Honda and Toyota in the sort of the old dominant design as ICE. Now, another way to look at this is, I just talk about the Volkswagen versus Geely. Again, Volkswagen used to have this sort of old trajectory, and they're getting into the mature stage, and they are having trouble in identifying the new growth area. And Geely came in this same ICE-based industry, but they're starting to get in from a low-end angle, and that they really attack the market from the mass demand, and also gradually climbing up the technology ladder. But the other way to look at this is that Tesla didn't come in with this ICE-based sort of arena. And what they came in is through a different dimension. What they are trying to provide to the customers is a new dimension of performance, whether it's about the speed of acceleration and the software-based sort of update, the over-the-air update, and certainly the other feature is autonomous driving. And a lot of customers, based on what Bruce has showed us, are looking for an electric car for these features, these technology-rich features, autonomous driving, over-the-air update, and so on and so forth. And these are the things that is obtained or pioneered by a company like Tesla. And so they come in from a very different angle of attack, trying to come up with some new dimension for customers to really move from the ICE-based model to the new electric drive model. And they have been very, very successful in doing that. And we have seen, along with other factors, the transition of customer demand or transition of customer preference from ICE-based to the electric drive. Now, are there any potential change, or what's after the EV as a dominant design? There could be some other things coming in the sort of the new dimension beyond the EV, and that possibly could be the flying cars, where we start from the 2D and we will get into the 3D dimension of transportation or mobility. So that will be another evolution, possibly next step after electric drive. Now, this is the EV sales by manufacturer in December last year, and you can see the top sellers: GM, Wuling, BYD, Tesla, and SAIC, and so on. You certainly see some of the domestic players right here, like BYD, like SAIC, and Great Wall. the so-called established old player in the ICE-based industry, but they are transitioning to the new electric drive. But you're also starting to see these so-called new forces that they are purely electric drive based, and they started from that and really jumping up and be a visible player in the last few years. And but one critical piece is missing here is some of the big players in the ICE-based models. For example, Volkswagen and Honda and Toyota and several others. One interesting player here is GM Wuling, which is a joint venture between GM and SAIC and also Wuling as a auto plant. And they push up a model that's very interesting, that's really coming in at the very low end with a very basic component at extremely low price. So let me show you the picture of these sort of players. Now I show you the three models from three companies and possibly representing three different strategies or approaches. And you can see Tesla coming in with more or less the differentiator perspective, high-end, relatively more sophisticated with all the bells and whistles, the autonomous driving, the over-the-air update and long distance or long range and so on. Now, at the very low end, that's GM Wuling with the Mini. And you'll be surprised with the price at $4,500 per car. And Model 3 is selling around $40,000 per car. And this is Volkswagen's offering. The latest offering is ID3. I think they're going to introduce ID4 and so on. But the price is somewhere in the middle, which is about $25,000. Now, in the strategic management theories, you don't want to be stuck in the middle. You want to either be on the differentiation side, or you want to get the cost leadership side. And GM with Mini certainly is coming in on the cost leadership strategy approach. And Volkswagen seems to be stuck in the middle. And that put pressure on them, whether the high-end customers tend to go for the feature-rich Model 3, and the low-end, especially the young generation, they are looking for something that's more affordable and also fun. And Wuling Mini is actually fitting that bill, offering a lot of different color, a lot of different design, a lot of different fun factors into that car. And that's one of the reasons why they topped the sales chart. And Volkswagen and several other of these established multinational corporations is struggling in this particular competitive field. And I predict that they're continue going to be struggling in this area in the coming years. Now, looking ahead, what's going to happen in the long run, maybe 5 years down the road or even 10 years down the road? So here are some scenarios that I can see. The first one is there will be a total fast transition to EV. Again, coupled with the government policy push and the consumers' transition of their preference. And in this competitive landscape, brand awareness and loyalty is starting to shape and starting to form. And many of these customers, when they talk about EV in China, Tesla, NIO, Li, Xiaopeng will become the brand that they associate with electric drive. And that becoming difficult for the large OEMs to overcome. So that's definitely a barrier for them. And the new demographics, again, the young generation starting to rise up with more environmental awareness, and they tend to go for the the new and the green cars, and that certainly will help the entire transition to EV. Some major players will not win in this game, will not even survive. Just like what we have witnessed in many other industries, like Motorola, Dell, maybe Kodak. These great companies, once at the top of the industry, gradually fade out because the industry dominant design has shifted and they were not able to catch that next train. So some of the major players, ICE based today, will not survive this transition. Exactly who, we don't know, but I would say some of them will definitely not survive this. Now, the scenario number 2 will be the coexistence of ICE-based and electric drive for a relatively long time. Part of the reason is we may starting to witness a bottleneck in the development of electric drive. And one of them is certainly the raw materials. And if any of you are paying attention to the material market, lithium had a price rise over 400% this year, in 1 year. And that certainly is the key ingredient for the batteries. And if that is going to be the case, because so many companies are transitioning to EV and the demand for lithium-based battery is skyrocketing, and that put the constraint on the supply of the raw material, and that could be a major bottleneck for years to come. And if that's the case, the price of electric drive will get significantly high, and that probably will put the ICE-based cars as a more less pricey alternative, and that certainly will give them a chance to coexist with the electric drive. And that's certainly a potential scenario 2. Now, scenario 3 is more radical. It's talking about how do we go from 2D mobility to 3D mobility, and I see that push from many companies now, whether it's Geely in China or Xiaopeng in China. And many of these things are starting to attract more attention, starting to attract more investment. And it probably is the beginning of the next phase beyond electric drive. And we are going to see a new mobility model that's going to emerge maybe 10 years down the road or 20 years down the road, which is a very, very interesting development. I think I'll stop here, and I'll be happy to discuss any questions with you guys. Thank you very much.
Very good. Thank you, Tom. Why don't you stop your screen share?
Let me.
There you go. Yeah, we got some questions for you. So when you look at what's going on in the EV market, especially in China, and I think we're really focusing on China here. Do you see it as 2021 the tipping point for China?
In terms of transition, transition to electric, I think the tipping point is not there. It's probably more in 2018, where Tesla really went in there and starting to build up the factory in 1 year. And starting to sell in a relatively big scale. That I think is the big tipping point for the electric drive. And that's when the other producers like NIO, Xiaopeng, and starting to really believe that they can win and they can have a real chance of survival and even success. And that also convinced the other players that this is inevitable and we have to be part of that. I think that's the tipping gear.
And then So when you look at the paradigm that you were showing about, the coming in the low end and Tesla coming in at the high end and being a disruptor, right? Were you surprised by the Tesla strategy as the one that they used, or were you surprised that it was successful, or what was your general feeling about it?
Well, I think that first that the transition is inevitable, and whoever wins that is somewhat by chance. Tesla was not the only one that sort of tried that strategy, right? And we witnessed the introduction of the idea of electric drive almost 15 years ago, or even longer before that.
Mm-hmm.
And Tesla, I think the other one that I remember is Fisker.
Right.
That's right. So they followed pretty much the same strategy, right? And they try to come in and from the high end and starting to get the initial buy-in from the high-end buyers that they can afford the high price for the electric cars. And gradually they will find a way to mass produce and to get a more affordable car to the mass market. So it's not something that's surprising to a long-term industry observer. But again, who wins that? It was determined by many different factors. Yeah. And Tesla, again, Elon Musk was certainly the X factor in their success. Tesla was not founded by Musk, and he took it over from the two founders in California. But he certainly was the one who successfully pushed the design to a great level, and also pushed the mass production into reality. But another critical factor is that they remember in 2018 or so, or 2017 or 18, Tesla was not in good shape. They were on the brink of bankruptcy. Yeah. And the critical factor at the time is China. He negotiated with Shanghai government and get the $1 billion loan or guarantee, and also get the land for free almost, and the tax policies and so on and so forth, and get the government to really support it with full throttle. And they were able to get that factory up in 1 year and starting to produce cars, and with the market right there. That was the critical moment for Tesla. And if there is no Shanghai government involvement, Tesla is not where it is today.
Yeah, I think one of the other areas was the selling of credits. So like, I think it was 2019, I think around this time in 2019, that they needed money. And because they were just getting ready to launch the Model 3. But they were able to continue, and before that as well, they were able to, they would probably say thank goodness to FCA for using the strategy that they used, because it allowed them to sell them credits and to keep them in business.
Absolutely.
Again, that was, the selling of credits is an artificial program set up by the government that actually allowed, again, in this case, a disruptor to actually survive in a market that it usually just chews up competitors. And
don't forget that the U.S. federal government also helped Tesla drastically. I believe there was a federal loan of $468 million.
Okay.
So that also is a critical factor there that keeps Tesla afloat. Otherwise, it's dead.
Yeah, and that is before the Model 3, right?
Yes.
Yeah. That's Model X, Model S development, probably, right?
That's right. So it's not necessarily the market picked the winner. The government has a visible hand, definitely, from two countries that actually kept the.
That's a good point. That's a good point. And not only through the loan, then through the credits, and then through the incentives for consumers to buy the vehicles.
Absolutely.
Right? And And yet throughout this whole time, the dominant design manufacturers were not really taking advantage of it.
No, they basically sit on the sideline and trying to do this half-heartedly.
Yeah.
They get involved in this electric drive a long time ago. They were not sort of new to this, but they never really jump into this market with full throttle. Part of the reason is that I guess all the other divisions don't want to be considered the cash cow, that they have to milk the question mark division of the electric drive.
Right.
And, so for Tesla or NIO or Xiaopeng, their financing model is very different, right? So they're different, independent from any major automakers, and they depend on the venture capital to support them, and also government support. So both of these sources has a higher risk tolerance, and they can tolerate the cash burn for quite a few years. But that's not going to happen in any major existing automakers, because the shareholders will not be happy, because the new EV division will drag the entire company down. And certainly that will drag the share price down.
Right.
So it's a very different financing model, but that probably will determine the fate for this transition. That it's not going to happen in the hands of big established old technology owners, but rather the more independent holder of new technology.
I guess the question is, is it really too late for them? I would argue that they, in the past, that one of the reasons that they dragged their feet was they maybe didn't feel like the battery technology was ready. I mean, of course, GM found that out with the EV1. They were using lead acid batteries, right? Yeah. So they knew where the battery technology was, and I think it just coincided with help from Tesla, because they were actually supporting this as well with Panasonic, right? And in the development of a battery that would be competitive, make the vehicle more competitive. And I think the manufacturers kept waiting for that. But once that actually was established, and it's not perfect by any means, and we haven't seen the end of batteries, and they're not at their peak by any. We're still there. They're like teenagers. But there was a time a little before now that they could have jumped in probably in a more forceful way, and decided not to, and either because of company strategy, shareholder strategy, the reliance on being able to, well, in the U.S. it's so unique because of the light truck market, which is 70% of sales. Well, then if you can't come out with a vehicle that meets it, that fits into that category,
it's for them to give away, not to participate, and so they use the money to expand the capacity there, and don't want to really risk
and the question is, are they too late? I mean, you mentioned that they're missing out on brand awareness, on building brand awareness, but as you saw from the stuff that I was showing, they're coming. They are coming. They are coming full steam.
Yes,
by 2025.
But it could be late for them.
Well, like you said, it may be late for some of them.
Yes.
And it won't be late for everybody.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. So it's always a fascinating industry to follow, because there's always something going on, and it's something good. It's definitely going on now. Something dramatic is going on right now, and I think that's why we have these conferences. So we can have these discussions so that the attendees and ourselves can talk about these things and kind of work out where we think things are headed, and especially that, and where some of the weaknesses and the strengths of different strategies. That's part of the story. I think that's all the questions we have for you today, Tom. Do you have anything you want to add?
No, but I'm looking forward to see some flying cars in the near future.
Yeah, I just saw a picture of a Honda version. Yeah, they're working on it as well. Well, every time I think of flying cars, I think of Blade Runner. And that's definitely a rough ride there. Well, again, thanks to our affiliates for support for the program. Our next conference is New Mobility and the Revolution of Goods Movement, something that the pandemic has really pushed forward and made a huge deal. We'll also encourage anyone who's with us to follow us on LinkedIn, to connect and follow us. The Meet the Speaker program follows this, and the presentations will be available this weekend. Thanks, everybody, and we'll see you in February 16th for our next conference. Take care.